Join me at 9 p.m. Eastern tonight on Twitch and YouTube, where we will play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. Link to play below. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. Suppose you're friends with someone who, for the purposes of our story, let's call him Alex. Alex calls on you because he's in some serious trouble. He absolutely hates his job. The boss treats him terribly. He's underpaid compared to his peers, and the bills are starting to stack up as his rent is increasing. And while he loves living in your city, he gives an ultimatum to you as a friend. Help me find another job here, or I'm leaving the city and moving back in with my parents halfway across the country. He knows that you have connections, so you help him apply for jobs. However, every single job that you try to suggest that he apply for, he says, "Nah, I don't really want to do that." And it's not like you're suggesting jobs that he can apply for that are beneath him or don't match his skill set. These are jobs in the same skill set that he's qualified for. This is exactly what he's looking for. And in some cases, these jobs even give him a better opportunity in every possible way than he was having before. Yet, every idea that you give him, despite your help, he doesn't even think twice about rejecting. Just says, "Nah, I don't really feel like it. Try again." Seems incredibly selfish, right? Seems like you'd hit your breaking point very quickly with that. Here you are trying to help the man out when you don't have to accommodate his request at all. You're doing this because you want to. And every time you try to help him, he disregards it as though it's nothing. It's awful behavior. It's completely unprofessional. And it makes you look like an ungrateful and completely delusional person. Well, I bring all of that up because the man that you've been watching this whole time is none other than Atlanta Falcons quarterback, Dennis Claridge. Odds are, before this video, you've never heard of the man. Of all the quarterbacks to ever start a game for the team, he might be the most obscure one of the bunch. But man, does he have a story to tell. You might not know who he is now, but I promise you, within the next 15 minutes, you're going to be developing some sort of feelings toward him, and not in a good way. Because after the 1966 season, Claridge had a request to the Falcons, which the Falcons were 100% willing to accommodate and help him out with, even though they did not have any obligation to do so whatsoever. And you're not going to believe just how badly Claridge spit in their face. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the craziest, the most delusional, and the most disrespectful quarterback in the near 60-year history of the Atlanta Falcons franchise. Before I talk about the request and what went down after that, we need some context to understand, quite simply, just who Dennis Claridge was in the first place, how good he was as a quarterback, and what his role was on the team. The year is 1966, and the Atlanta Falcons are just starting out as an expansion team. And while the team had a few possible options at their disposal, including their first-round pick in quarterback Randy Johnson, and their 11th round pick out of Alabama in Steve Sloan, they had this guy right here, Dennis Claridge, that they were banking on to some extent. And it made sense as to why Claridge was here after spending 3 years with the Green Bay Packers as the understudy to Bart Starr. Not only had Claridge learned a lot under some great coaching and great quarterback play, but the head coach of the Falcons, Norb Hecker, came from Green Bay as the team's defensive backs coach since 1959. Hecker knew Claridge well, and saw him throwing every day in practice for the last 3 years. He knew what he could bring to the table. At the moment that the Packers left Claridge unprotected for the Falcons to take, Hecker jumped all over that, being pleasantly surprised that he had him as his quarterback. Said Hecker, "Claridge is a tremendous prospect. I didn't expect him to be available." Now, Packers head coach Vince Lombardi was stunned that the Falcons were crazy enough to take him, saying that he was surprised that the Falcons took him, and said, "He hasn't had much game experience, but hey, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And honestly, in 1966, as you've been able to tell from all of these highlights, Dennis Claridge was not that bad. Seriously, he was maybe the one Falcon quarterback who knew what they were doing. No, he did not win any games. In fact, the Falcons went 0-3 in the 3 games that he started under center. But he was an awfully efficient passer who didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. Just to give you an idea of that, back in 1966, each team played 14 games. A quarterback who throws 5 passes a game, on average, will throw 70 passes over the course of the season. In 1966, there were 23 quarterbacks to do this, and average 5 passes per game, or at least 70 passes on the entire season. Here, you see them all sorted by their passer rating. And right near the top of the list, amazingly enough, was Dennis Claridge. Of those 23 quarterbacks, Claridge ranks 7th in passer rating at 75.4. That's really good. If you've got a quarterback in the top third of the league in passer rating, and this is his first season as a starter, you're clearly doing something right, especially at a time when the league-wide average of passer rating was right around 67. And now, let's take these same 23 quarterbacks and organize them by completion percentage, as Claridge completed 57.1% of his passes, which was well above the league-wide average of 51.6%. Once again, you see Dennis Claridge near the top of the list. He was an extremely accurate passer, who, among quarterbacks to average at least 5 pass attempts per game, ranked 3rd in the entire NFL. The only 2 quarterbacks ahead of him were 2 eventual Hall of Famers, in Sonny Jurgensen at 58.3% and Bart Starr at 62.2%. That was it. The numbers for Claridge as it related to the rest of the NFL were very impressive, considering the circumstances of this being his first year as a starter and this being work with an expansion team, which is always going to be tough. But when you compare the numbers with the other quarterbacks on the Falcons, it was like Claridge was playing a completely different sport. The Falcons had 3 quarterbacks suit up for them in 1966. Those 3 were Randy Johnson, Dennis Claridge, and Steve Sloan. Let's look at the completion percentage for each 3. And wow, Claridge is blowing by the rest of the guys. He's at over 57%, while Sloan is just a hair above 46%, and Johnson is below 44%. Now, let's look at the interception percentage, or the percentage of throws that you throw a pick on. With the lower the number, the better. Claridge was very smart with the ball, only throwing a pick on 2.9% of his passes. Randy Johnson at 7.1%, and Steve Sloan at 15.4%? Yeah, not so much. And finally, let's look at passer rating, where it really becomes evident as to the gap between these 3 men. Steve Sloan was at the bottom at 31.7%, which is worse than if he did nothing, but spiked the ball into the ground on every single play. Randy Johnson wasn't great at 47.8. He was well below the league-wide average. And then, there's Dennis Claridge at 75.4, nearly 30 points better than the team's first-round pick. Claridge was the best quarterback by every metric, and it honestly wasn't even that close. Which is why it was incredibly frustrating to Claridge when he was not the primary starter on the team, as the Falcons were riding with Randy Johnson for most of the 1966 season, as well as heading into 1967. Claridge was fuming that he had to ride the pine and only make the occasional start or appearance, because in his eyes, he thought he was better. And I can't exactly blame him, because it seemed like the only one that didn't believe in Dennis Claridge over Randy Johnson was the man who, oddly enough, wanted Claridge in the first place, Norm Pecker. And because of this, Dennis Claridge gave the Falcons an ultimatum. I'm done here. I don't want to play for you guys again. I'm not going to be riding the bench when I'm the better quarterback. Either trade me away to a different team, or I'm quitting football forever. I'll pursue another career and go to dental school and walk away from the sport unless you trade me, because I am never wearing a Falcon uniform ever again. Claridge was livid, and it's not like this didn't come out of nowhere. He was angry when he started the preseason games, and then was not named the starter for the start of the regular season. And this was back in a time when if you started the preseason games, you were pretty much guaranteed to start the regular season. And now, after the 1966 season, he was at his breaking point. Said Claridge, "I want to play football, and that's why I'm quitting. It is because of the discouraging year in Atlanta that I felt when the season was over that I had to be traded or quit. I proved to myself in Atlanta that I could play. I was not a great quarterback, but I was the best quarterback the Falcons had. I know this makes me sound like some sort of bad actor, but the only thing I can really go on is statistics. Mine are better. I'd rather play for a team that wins 3 games than sit on the bench for a team that wins them all." As for how the Falcons responded to his trade request, well, amazingly enough, they were super understanding of it and were respectful of his wishes. Obviously, they wanted to see him in a Falcon uniform, but if the options were to trade him and get something, or get nothing and have him retire, they wanted option 1. Plus, Hecker genuinely liked Claridge, even if he did have him ride the pine. And the Falcons were going to do everything in their power to not just trade him, but to trade him to a place of his choosing. Said Hecker, "Dennis is a fine boy, and I'd like to see him play. We'll try to trade him, and perhaps we can work it out as early as next week. Dennis thinks he's the best, and he thinks he should be playing ahead of Randy Johnson. I admire him for feeling that way. All of them should, or else they shouldn't be around." Added Hecker, making it very clear what his stance was on the issue. "We'll work something out." So this seemed to be an incredibly professional way for the two sides to split up, right? Claridge thinks he should be playing, and he's not, so he requests a trade, and the Falcons say, "We completely understand and respect your decision. We'll trade you somewhere where you can play. No problem." And if that was what ended up happening, then it's not really much of a story that deserves to be remembered nearly 60 years later. It's a big deal, especially at the time, since it involves a quarterback, as in the most important position in football, getting traded, but players requesting trades and then teams trying to cooperate and trade the player, that is not uncommon in the slightest bit. It happens all the time, and that's what the Falcons were trying to do here. Which raises the question, where would Claridge get traded to? Well, the first team that seemed to be on the radar was the New Orleans Saints, which made sense, seeing as they needed a quarterback, and the head coach of the Saints was Tom Fears, who was the offensive coordinator of the Falcons in 1966, so he knew Claridge well. And it seemed like a done deal. Claridge would get traded to the Saints, and the problem would be solved. However, Claridge, for whatever reason, didn't want to go there. "Trade me anywhere but New Orleans." As Tom Fears said, "I have talked with Denny. We were interested in him because we feel he could be a good, solid NFL quarterback. But right now, it's very questionable we can work out a trade with him. I'd say we are at a definite impasse right now." Alright, so he doesn't want to go to the Saints. I mean, beggars can't really be choosers, and maybe there was a falling out with Tom Fears or something, but I get it. You don't want to be on an expansion team in back-to-back years. What about the Chicago Bears? The Bears had the worst passing offense in football in 1966, finishing dead last in the league in passing yards and second to last in passing touchdowns. You could absolutely start there, especially since the two quarterbacks to play for them in 1966 were both going to be 37 years old in 1967 and had nothing left in the tank. Seems like a great fit. However, Claridge declined to have negotiations with them. "Trade me anywhere but New Orleans or Chicago." What about the Green Bay Packers? Go back to your old team, be the backup to Bart Starr for a year or two, and then take over the starting gig after that. Once again, Claridge declined to have negotiations with them. Trade me anywhere but New Orleans, or Chicago, or Green Bay. What about the Minnesota Vikings? They now have a pretty gaping hole at quarterback after trading Fran Tarkenton away to the New York Giants. So you could replace one disgruntled quarterback with another. Even though Claridge had negotiations with them, once again, they fell through. Trade me anywhere but New Orleans, or Chicago, or Green Bay, or Minnesota. What about the Detroit Lions? There were reports that they were dissatisfied with their starting quarterback from 1966, Milt Plum, and were looking to trade him, although that rumor was denied by the team. Claridge would have a chance, especially with a new coaching staff, to compete there and get the starting job. However, once again, Claridge was not interested. As Claridge said, they asked if I was interested. I thought about it and called them back and said no. Trade me anywhere but New Orleans, or Chicago, or Green Bay, or Minnesota, or Detroit. So let me get this straight. Your grand plan is to step 1, request a trade out of Atlanta. Then for step 2, when the Falcons accommodate your request and try to facilitate a trade to get you out of Atlanta so you can get a lot of reps, decline a trade with just about every single trading partner imaginable. Step 3 is... ? Step 4 is, profit, I guess? Yeah, it's insane. And look, if Claridge just lost interest in football and wanted to go to dental school and pursue that chapter of his career, fine. It happens. Just say that you're retiring and it's nothing to do with you guys. It's just that I've got other opportunities lined up. No hard feelings. But to do this? To force Atlanta's hand into trading you? And then the Falcons front office works their butts off fielding offers and trying to ship you out to every possible team so that you can still play and you don't have to retire? And then, every single time the Falcons come to you with a destination, you say no? I mean, how low do you have to go in order to do that? Rejecting a trade offer with one team? Fine, I get it. But here you are rejecting offers from half the league. Good teams, bad teams, teams close to home, teams where you'd be the starter hands down. The Falcons were trying their absolute hardest to get this done for you, for only you, and they would have done anything, literally anything, to get you on another team so you didn't have to retire. Heck, say what you want about how ineffective and incompetent Norb Hecker was as a head coach, but he went to bat for you and said straight up, we had no plans to retire Dennis. He did a good job. He was selling you to other teams like crazy. And you do this? I mean, this is just so comically low and awful and offensive that I don't even know what to say. To the shock of absolutely no one, Dennis Claridge did not play another game in the NFL after the 1966 season, as he was done for good to pursue that career in dentistry. Big an odd choice not to delay that by 1 year, considering, well, everything that happened, and considering the fact that he could have started with a lot of different teams, and considering the fact, most importantly, that once you play 5 years in the NFL, you're on their pension program, and he was about to enter his 5th year in the league in 1967. But hey, who am I to question the brilliant logic of Dennis Claridge? The only thing that's worse than that is my lack of Falcons helmets behind me in that case, although there is a reason for that order for the case. So if you do know the order, let me know in the comments below. So what do we learn from all of this? If you are an NFL player and you request a trade, look at what Dennis Claridge did. And then do literally the exact opposite. If you have any respect for yourself and your fellow teammates, do the exact opposite. Don't make this ultimatum if you're not going to follow through. Don't make a trade request without an open mind. Don't say, trade me or I quit, it's up to you, and then reject every single trade offer and force your team to work for nothing. What Dennis Claridge did truly was awful, dragging the Falcons through the mud like that. Because after the 1966 season, DC didn't stand for Dennis Claridge, but rather stood for delusional crazy. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.